And outspeak brave Horatius, the captain of the gate. To every man upon this earth death cometh soon or late. And how can man die better than facing fearful odds? For the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods.
The first explosion shook the park like an earthquake. Marisol fell off her feet and tumbled to the ground in front of Blake. Blue light filled Marisol's vision as soul fire erupted into the air, igniting several nearby trees. Car alarms rent the air as the community of Shiatown quickly woke up in a panic. Looking up, Marisol spotted Sebakhira. The anthropomorphic lioness had crossed her forelegs in front of her. A shimmering construct of purple light, shaped like a rectangle, had appeared in front of Sebakhira. Tenna's psionic attacks deflected off the barrier, flying off to strike trees and cars and houses. "Stop!" Blake yelled. "Stop fighting now!" He stepped forward, raising his musket. "What the hell are you doing?" Marisol yelled. "You're gonna get killed!" Tenna spotted Blake and turned, trying to direct her next attack onto him. A bolt of lightning jumped out of Tenna's outstretched palm, aiming at Blake. Before it could reach him, the bolt hit an invisible field and scattered. Sebakhira was circling around in front of Blake, blocking all of Tenna's strikes. "Get out of the way!" Blake yelled, aiming down the sights. The musket was aimed at Tenna's face. A large European wolf lunged out of the darkness and jumped Tenna, sinking its teeth into her right arm. Tenna screamed. So did Marisol. "Aisling!" Marisol gasped. "Move now!" Blake had reached Sebakhira. He shoved the lioness aside and took aim. "Aisling, let go of her!" Marisol yelled. "He's gonna shoot!" Aisling picked up on Marisol's voice and released Tenna, lumbering away with blood staining her jaws. A moment later, Marisol heard a loud clicking noise, followed by a very loud crack of thunder. Marisol knew what a musket was, and she had expected the weapon in Blake's hands to behave a certain way. It did not. Blake's weapon emitted a flash of light that was, for a brief moment, brighter than the sun. Marisol was blinded for a few seconds, a shimmering white spot taking up the center of her field of vision. The blast also deafened Marisol and left her ears ringing. She scrambled to get back onto her feet, then noticed the other three fighters. Aisling, Sebakhira, and Tenna were all on the ground, their eyes wide, clutching their ears and moaning in agony. Tenna was the first one back on her feet. She tore the hem of her dress and wrapped the fabric around the bloody bite marks on her arm, fumbling as she went. She was clearly disoriented. Marisol stumbled onto her feet, slowly starting to realize what had just happened. "Fucking homemade flashbang," Marisol gasped. Marisol staggered toward Tenna, determined to put the wayward character back on the ground before she could do anything dangerous. But Blake reached her first. A deadly kind of stillness fell over the park as Blake reached into his coat pocket and produced a pistol. Dropping the musket on the ground, Blake grabbed Tenna by the hair with one hand and pushed the barrel of the pistol into her chest with the other. Marisol's entire body filled with fear. She barely understood what was going on, what sort of nightmarish situation she had just stumbled into, but for some reason, the thought that she might witness a murder was troubling her more than the thought of being murdered. "Wait, stop!" she screamed reflexively. Blake hesitated, finger on the trigger, and a moment later he lost his opportunity. A black shadow suddenly appeared in the folds of Tenna's dress. It drew itself up and converged on the point where the barrel of Blake's pistol was touching Tenna's breast. A moment later, the handgun crumbled to dust in his hands, falling down the front of Tenna's dress and causing her to jump in fright. An invisible pulse of telekinesis threw Blake away from Tenna. He tripped over Sebakhira and fell onto his back. The people of Shiatown were now awake. House lights were on. Voices sounded from the darkness, but one drew closer. "This is what you get for charging in without a plan, Honora." A man appeared from the darkness, coming from the south, which suggested he had crossed the Shiawassee River to get here. His feet squelched in the grass, leaving a muddy trail behind. Marisol blinked furiously to get the white spot in her vision to go away. Trying to get a better look at the newcomer, she spotted the bright red light of a laser pistol in his hand, which instantly gave him away as a character from the Stormbreaker universe, one of Blake's earliest stories. The newcomer was a lanky man with messy snow-white hair, brown skin, purple eyes, and tattoos on his neck and arms that depicted vaguely Polynesian symbols. This man was one of the Partogans, a fictional civilization based heavily on real-life Maori people that prominently featured in the Stormbreaker universe. "Where have you been?" Tenna shouted at the man. "Come on, Blake's right here." "A Partogan?" Sebakhira said, getting shakily back to her own feet. "Here?" The Partogan man narrowed his eyes at Sebakhira. "Step aside, Lavakian," he spoke in a stern voice, referring to Sebakhira by the name of her species. "I don't have a reason to fight you, just him." Blake was back on his feet, fists clenched. Finally, Marisol's brain got back into working order. She recognized the Partogan man, although it had taken a while. This was Kiri Ranginui, main protagonist of A Cold War Affair, the only book in the Stormbreaker universe to be declared non-canon by the author. As far as the long-running sci-fi series was concerned, Kiri Ranginui did not exist. Aisling was back on her feet as well. She bared her teeth and growled at Kiri. Marisol put herself between Blake and Kiri. She could hear police sirens. Kiri looked at Tenna, then dismissed her words. "Nah, the authorities are coming, and all of my nanobots are busy eating that gun. If we stick around, we won't be able to get away. Let's get out of here now." Kiri wrapped his arm around Tenna's waist and pulled her away from the scene. A trail of black slime followed him, moving across the ground like a semi-corporeal snake. "We need to get out of here," Blake said, grabbing his musket off the ground. "This way, everyone. Into my car. You too, Cho-senpai. In for a penny, in for a pound at this point." Blake's car, a silver four-door sedan, made a dangerous creaking sound as Sebakhira clambered into the back seat. Marisol had never truly appreciated just how large and heavy a lion could be until she was seated in front of one. Aisling shapeshifted into a rabbit and curled up on the dashboard to make room for Sebakhira, while Marisol took the front passenger seat. "Where are we going?" Marisol asked. "We're picking up a few things from my house, and then we're going to meet someone who can help," Blake said. "Keep your heads low. We're going around the police." In the distance, Marisol could see several flashing red lights. Blake seemed to know Shiatown very well. He turned onto a side street and shut off the car's headlights. All around, locals were emerging from their homes, smartphones aimed towards Shiatown Park, where two larger pine trees were still on fire. "Gonna get bumpy," Blake said. "We're gonna cut across the farm field and head north. We've got about a 20-minute drive ahead of us, so I think some introductions are in order." Aisling made a squeaking noise and looked up at Blake. Yeah, Blake started. "My name is Blake Robinson. I'm a writer and author, and I created you. The girl in the passenger seat is Cho-senpai. She helps me, and, this is the first time we've actually met face-to-face." Sebakhira's voice sounded from the back seat. "Marisol is upset you don't call her by her real name. Also, she is offended that you keep looking at her the way you would a child." "Fucking telepaths," Blake shouted from the driver's seat. "That mind-reading thing is going to get old real quick." Then he looked over at Marisol, who was wearing her emotions on her face. Right. Mary, was it? He asked. Marisol, Marisol replied in a pouting tone. Marisol Reyes. And I swear on Mary and Joseph, if you say I look like a child... Marisol, you look like you're 4'8", Blake retorted. I am 4'10", Marisol protested. But that's not important. What are we going to do about these two? She gestured to Aisling and Sebakhira. The lioness used her telepathy again. Neither of you are as surprised as one should be in a scenario like this, Sebakhira said. Is this the first time you've had to deal with a fictional character gone rogue? Third, Blake and Marisol said together. But this is the worst it's ever gotten, Marisol added. We've never had to deal with more than one at a time. And your type never raised enough hell to get the state police involved, Blake chimed in. Speaking of involvement, I called Callie. She's on her way here from Stockholm. She's the one who prototyped that modified musket back there, by the way. Callie's helped me figure out some anti-psionic weapons in case something like this ever happened, and that was one of them. As soon as we pick up the essentials from my house, we're heading out to meet her. We just need to keep a low profile and try to avoid fighting any other characters who jump into the real world. Aisling hopped down from the dashboard and into Marisol's lap. The little bunny rabbit gave Marisol an apologetic look, then turned around to face away from her. A moment later, Marisol gasped in fright as Aisling transformed into her human shape. Very suddenly, a teenage girl was sitting in Marisol's lap, her shoulders pressing firmly into Marisol's face. Marisol was grateful that Aisling was a lightweight, and that she had remembered to turn around before changing shape. Never do that again, Marisol shouted into Aisling's back. You're pinning my hands and feet. Can you move, please? Aisling ignored Marisol and spoke to Blake. So you're like a bard or chronicler, and you wrote stories about all of us? You should tell us about the others then, since you would know everything about them. Well, Blake sighed, everyone seems to have changed a little since they jumped out of the pages. Tenna was never supposed to be a warrior like that. She was a love interest for another hero. You know, Trig would save the day, defeat the villain, and then he'd get to have Tenna as a reward. That has got to be the most horribly sexist thing I've heard all day, Marisol mumbled from underneath Aisling. Maybe you should go back to writing women. Get some perspective. What about the man? Aisling inquired. Sebakhira leaned forward. That man is from my world, Sebakhira said, but I did not recognize him. I wrote almost a dozen stories that are all set in the same world, Blake replied. Sebakhira, you lived in the middle of a much larger story that goes for hundreds of years into the past and future. That man is called Kiri, and he's from what you would call the future. He was born almost 200 years after you. I see, Sebakhira replied, which means he would know about this uprising you mentioned. What can you tell me about it? Wait a minute, Blake said. You should know all about the Levakian uprising. You were a key player at the Battle of Auraki. Marisol wrapped her arms around Aisling's stomach and pushed her aside, allowing her to address Blake. Aisling did not seem to mind. Her face was scrunched up against the passenger window, and she found it fascinating. Hold on, Blake. This is a specific version of Sebakhira from an earlier part of Faith in Chaos. She doesn't know about the Levakian uprising. It probably hasn't even started yet for her. Blake frowned, then turned the car onto a paved road, transitioning from a farm field to the parking lot of the Islamic Center on M21. He checked left and right before pulling onto the state highway. There's an easy way to find out what part of the story she's from, Blake said. Tell me, Sebakhira, who is the current Queen of Partoga and who is the current Empress of Levakia? Sebakhira replied quickly. The Partogan Queen just died. There was a news report about her this morning. Empress Jemima is a prisoner in her own palace. Where are Jemima's daughters? Blake asked. Princess Korikopat and Princess Tantomile are both on the run, Sebakhira answered. Although Tantomile killed my employer, the king of Paku Nui, just recently. Right. She's from the end of Act 2, just before the start of the royal election arc, Blake said. I know roughly where Tenna's from. You were there when it all went down, Marisol. Tenna was the most recent of your characters to rebel, Sebakhira asked. Am I correct? If you can answer your own questions by reading minds, why ask at all? Marisol asked. She's forced to. It's the way I wrote Sebakhira and all other telepaths, Blake said, for the convenience of the reader. Curious. I do not feel forced, Sebakhira mused. Well, that's because, Blake started to say, but he stopped when Marisol giggled. What? You sound like a parent talking to their child, Marisol giggled. The whole situation is just kinda, I don't know, silly. Hey, who are you calling parent and child? Blake said. In terms of physical and mental development, Sebakhira is almost twice my age. Sebakhira let out a deep growling sound that caused Blake to jump. Fuck! I forgot the pre-2035 Levakians can't purr, he grumbled. Aisling turned around, pivoting on top of Marisol's lap until she was facing Sebakhira, and pressing her knee into Marisol's lower abdomen. Is that what you are? Aisling asked. Levakian is what your people are called? Sebakhira nodded. Yes, little darling. I am a member of the Levakian race. Who are you, and what are your people called? My name is Aisling, and I'm a daughter of the Tautha de Danann. She's a fairy, Marisol grunted. A fairy who's pushing really hard against something she shouldn't. Get off! Aisling apologized and shapeshifted into a small cat. She curled up in Marisol's lap and began to purr loudly by way of apology. Sebakhira chuckled and said to Marisol, Who are you? What are your people called? Marisol, I'm from the Philippines. Nice to meet you.